Historians restore a 1901 photograph and discover what the child was holding on his wrist. The air in the auction house smelled of old paper and forgotten time. Emma Bradford moved between the tables with practiced efficiency, her trained eye scanning daguerreotypes, tintypes, and faded album and prints that decades of neglect had rendered nearly invisible. As a restoration historian specializing in early American photography, she had learned to see past the damage, past the oxidation, the scratches, the water stains, to the stories trapped beneath. Most of what she found that morning was predictable. Stiff Victorian families, solemn children in Sunday clothes, couples frozen in awkward poses. But then her fingers stopped on a particular daguerreotype, its silver surface tarnished and cracked, housed in a deteriorating leather case. The image showed a typical scene from 1901. A well-dressed family gathered in what appeared to be a public park. The women wore elaborate dresses with high collars and decorative hats. The men stood proud in tailored suits, watch chains glinting even through the damage. Several children, immaculately groomed, smiled or maintained the serious expressions fashionable at the time. It was, by all appearances, an ordinary portrait of wealth and respectability from Boston's Gilded Age. Emma almost set it aside. Almost. But something caught her attention, a detail so subtle that most people would have missed it entirely. At the edge of the frame, partially obscured by the compositional focus on the central family, stood a boy. He couldn't have been more than 8 years old. While everyone else in the photograph faced the camera with rehearsed propriety, this child stared directly into the lens with an expression that sent a chill down Emma's spine. His eyes were cold. Not with the usual discomfort of sitting still for a long exposure, but with something far more unsettling, a look of profound rage mixed with desperate determination. His clothes hung in tatters, visibly filthy, even through the aged silver surface. The contrast between his appearance and the pristine family before him was jarring, almost violent in its disparity. But what truly captured Emma's attention was his right hand. The boy's fist was clenched so tightly that even across more than a century the tension was visible. He was holding something, hiding something, protecting something with a grip that spoke of desperation. Emma purchased the daguerreotype for $40. The auctioneer barely glanced at it, noting only "Family Portrait, circa 1901, condition fair" in his ledger. As she carefully wrapped it in acid-free tissue paper, Emma couldn't shake the image of that boy's eyes. Cold, knowing, accusing. She had no idea that within that clenched fist lay evidence of a crime that Boston's elite had worked desperately to bury, or that uncovering it would force her to confront the darkest corners of America's Gilded Age. Emma's studio occupied the third floor of a converted textile mill in Cambridge, its tall windows flooding the workspace with natural light, essential for examining photographic materials. She placed the daguerreotype on her examination table under a magnifying lamp, the kind conservators used for delicate restoration work. The family in the foreground came into sharper focus. The patriarch stood center frame, his hand resting possessively on an ornate walking stick. His wife sat beside him, her expression serene and distant. 3 children surrounded them, 2 girls in white pinafores and a boy in a sailor suit, all displaying the careful composure expected of their class. But Emma's attention kept returning to the figure in the background, the ragged boy. She adjusted the lamp, angling it to reduce glare on the silver surface. His face became clearer. Dirt smudged his cheeks. His hair, dark and unkempt, fell across his forehead. But those eyes, they dominated his features with an intensity that seemed impossible for a child. They weren't the eyes of someone posing. They were the eyes of someone bearing witness. Emma reached for her digital microscope, a tool that had revolutionized her work in recent years. She carefully positioned the daguerreotype beneath it and began taking high-resolution scans, working systematically across the entire surface. The process took nearly 3 hours. When she finally uploaded the images to her computer, she could examine details invisible to the naked eye. She zoomed in on the boy's clothing. What she had assumed were simple rags revealed themselves as the remnants of what had once been a workman's shirt and trousers, the kind worn by child laborers in factories and mills. The fabric was torn in places, stained with substances she couldn't identify through the photograph alone. His bare feet were visible beneath torn pant legs. Even in the degraded image, she could see they were covered in cuts and bruises. Emma leaned back in her chair, disturbed. Child labor was common in 1901, certainly, but the contrast in this image felt deliberate. Why would a wealthy family allow such a child to appear in their formal portrait? The photographer would have noticed. The family would have noticed. Yet there he stood, a ghost of poverty haunting their display of prosperity. She zoomed in further, focusing now on his clenched fist. The resolution was extraordinary for a daguerreotype of this era. The photographer had been skilled. She could see the tension in the small hand, the white knuckles, the way the fingers curved inward to protect whatever lay hidden in his palm. "What are you holding?" Emma whispered to the screen. She spent the next hour adjusting contrast, brightness, and sharpness, trying to see between the fingers. The daguerreotype's reflective surface made it challenging, but slowly, incrementally, details emerged. There was something there, something small, something he had risked everything to keep hidden during that long photographic exposure. Emma saved her work and sat back, rubbing her tired eyes. Tomorrow, she would begin the real restoration process, carefully removing oxidation, repairing the case, stabilizing the image. But tonight, she couldn't stop thinking about that boy. Who was he? Why was he there? And what secret had he carried in his fist for more than 120 years? The restoration process demanded patience and precision. Emma began the next morning by carefully removing the daguerreotype from its deteriorating case, documenting every step with photographs. The leather cover had degraded significantly, but the brass mat and glass cover plate had protected the silver surface from the worst environmental damage. She worked in controlled conditions, temperature and humidity carefully regulated to preserve the fragile materials. Using specialized tools, she gently cleaned the cover glass, removing more than a century of accumulated grime. Each swipe of the microfiber cloth revealed more detail, as if she were wiping away time itself. The daguerreotype itself required even more delicate handling. She couldn't simply clean the silver surface the way one might clean a modern photograph. Daguerreotypes were unique objects, direct positives created on silver-coated copper plates. Any aggressive cleaning could permanently damage the image. Instead, Emma used a technique called electrolytic reduction, carefully applying a mild solution that would remove tarnish without harming the underlying image. She worked under magnification, monitoring every millimeter of surface as the silver brightened incrementally. Hours passed. The family in the foreground emerged with stunning clarity. She could now read the embroidery on the women's dresses, see the individual links in the watch chains, distinguish the texture of the fabrics. The photographer had indeed been remarkably skilled. This was the work of a professional studio, not some itinerant street photographer. As the image cleared, Emma noticed something she had missed before. In the background, behind the ragged boy, stood what appeared to be the corner of a large building. She zoomed in with her digital microscope. The architecture was distinctive, red brick with white limestone trim, arched windows on the upper floors. It looked institutional, perhaps a school or government building. She made a note to research Boston Park locations near significant buildings from that era. But it was the boy who continued to dominate her attention. With the tarnish removed, his features became heartbreakingly clear. He couldn't have been more than 8, perhaps 9 years old. His face was thin, suggesting chronic hunger. A bruise darkened his left cheek, fresh enough to be visible even in the monochromatic silver. Emma felt a growing sense of unease. This wasn't just poverty, this was abuse. She returned her focus to his clenched fist. With the improved clarity, she could now see slight variations in tone between his fingers. Shadows that suggested something solid lay within his grasp. The object was small, perhaps the size of a large bean or a button. Using specialized photographic software, Emma began the digital enhancement process. She isolated the area of the fist, then systematically adjusted contrast ratios, applied edge detection algorithms, and used computational photography techniques that could reveal details beyond normal visual perception. Slowly, incrementally, the shadows between his fingers began to resolve into recognizable shapes. Emma leaned closer to her monitor, her heart rate accelerating. There was definitely something there, something organic in appearance, something that looked almost like... Her phone rang, shattering her concentration. She glanced at the caller ID, Marcus Chen, a colleague from Boston University's history department. Emma? Marcus's voice was characteristically energetic. I heard you picked up something interesting at yesterday's auction. Want to grab coffee and show me what you found? Emma looked back at her screen, at the partially revealed secret in that long dead boy's hand. Actually, Marcus, she said slowly, I think I might need more than your historical expertise. This one is unusual. Marcus arrived at Emma's studio 40 minutes later, carrying 2 coffees and his ever-present leather satchel stuffed with reference books. He was a specialist in Gilded Age Boston, particularly the social dynamics between the city's industrial elite and its working class, expertise that had made him invaluable to Emma's work on several previous projects. Show me, he said, settling into the chair beside her workstation. Emma pulled up the enhanced images on her large monitor. She walked him through the photograph, the elegant family, the park setting, and finally the boy in the background. Marcus leaned forward. His academic interest immediately piqued. The contrast is remarkable. Look at the quality of those suits. That's custom tailoring, probably from one of the shops on Boylston Street. But the boy? He trailed off, studying the ragged figure. That's not just poverty, Emma. Those injuries are recent. Emma nodded. That's what disturbed me. But there's more. She pulled up the enhanced images of the boy's fist. I've been working on revealing what he's holding. Marcus set down his coffee, his full attention now on the screen. You can see something? Almost. Emma adjusted the image, increasing the contrast further. The software I'm using can extrapolate details from shadow and light variations. It's not perfect, but she stopped as a new level of detail emerged. They both stared at the screen in silence. Between the boy's clenched fingers, now clearly visible, was a small, pale object. The shape was unmistakable, elongated, slightly curved, with a visible root structure at one end. Is that... Marcus began. A tooth, Emma finished. A human tooth. Adult-sized by the proportions. Marcus sat back slowly. His professional composure faltered. That's evidence. Evidence of what? Emma asked, though a sick feeling in her stomach suggested she already knew the answer. Marcus turned to his satchel, pulling out one of his reference books, a collection of archived Boston police reports from the turn of the century. He flipped through pages marked with colored tabs. I've been researching unsolved cases from this period. There were patterns the authorities ignored, servants who disappeared, workers who vanished, especially in wealthy households. The official explanations were always the same. They'd run away, returned to the old country, moved west. He looked up at Emma. But there were whispers. Always whispers. What kind of whispers? That some of Boston's most respected families were hiding something terrible. That behind the marble facades and manicured gardens, there was violence that never saw daylight. Marcus's voice dropped. Children saw things, Emma. Child servants, child workers who lived in those houses. They saw everything. But who would believe them? Emma looked back at the photograph, at the boy's cold, knowing eyes. He wanted someone to see, she said quietly. That's why he's looking at the camera like that. He knew this photograph would survive. He wanted evidence. Marcus pulled the monitor closer, studying the enhanced image. If we can identify this family, trace the location, cross-reference with missing persons reports from 1901, he paused. This could reopen cases that have been closed for over a century. Emma saved her work, then turned to face her colleague. Then we need to find out who this boy was, and what happened that made him clutch a human tooth like it was the most important thing in the world. Outside the studio windows, the afternoon light was fading. Below, Cambridge traffic hummed through the streets, and on the screen between them, a boy who had been dead for decades stared out with eyes that demanded justice. The Boston Public Library's Special Collections reading room maintained the hushed atmosphere of a cathedral. Emma and Marcus sat at a wooden table worn smooth by generations of researchers, surrounded by bound volumes of city directories, newspaper archives, and photographic collections from the early 1900s. They had started with the building visible in the photograph's background. Marcus had identified it within an hour. The distinctive red brick and limestone architecture belonged to the Boston Children's Aid Society building, which had stood at the corner of Rutland Square until its demolition in 1968. That narrows our location, Marcus said, running his finger down a hand-drawn map of the South End from 1901. The nearest public parks would have been Rutland Square itself, or possibly Worcester Square, about 2 blocks south. Emma compared the map to her enhanced photographs. The angle of the building suggests Rutland Square. She pulled up additional images on her laptop. I can see trees in the background, and what looks like ornamental fencing, typical of the better-maintained squares in that neighborhood. Marcus nodded, already reaching for a thick volume titled Boston Social Register 1901. If this was a professional portrait taken in a public park, the photographer likely had a studio nearby. And if the family was wealthy enough to afford custom tailoring and a professional photographer, he flipped pages. They'd be listed here. They worked in tandem, Emma examining photographic studio advertisements from Boston newspapers while Marcus cross-referenced wealthy families who lived near Rutland Square. The late afternoon sun slanted through the reading room's tall windows, casting long shadows across their research materials. Found something, Emma said suddenly. She turned her laptop toward Marcus. This advertisement, Edmund Pierce, photographic artist, studio on Tremont Street, specializing in family portraiture and estate photography. The address would have been within walking distance of Rutland Square. Marcus made a note. Edmund Pierce. I'll see if the library has any surviving examples of his work. If we can match the photographic style... He stopped mid-sentence, his finger frozen on a page of the social register. Emma, look at this. She leaned over. The entry read, Aldrich, Harrison P., residence 47 Rutland Square. Occupation, textile manufacturing. Family, wife Catherine, children Margaret, 12, Elizabeth 9, Harrison Jr., 7. Marcus pulled out the enhanced photograph, comparing it to the text. 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. The ages match approximately. Emma felt a cold sensation in her chest. So we potentially have the family. But who was the boy in the background? That's where it gets complicated, Marcus said. He pulled out another volume, a city census from 1900. Wealthy households often employed dozens of servants. Some lived on the premises. Many brought their children with them, who would work as servants themselves. But he flipped through pages of dense, handwritten entries. They weren't always recorded properly, especially children. Emma leaned back, processing the implications. So even if we've identified the family, finding the boy's name might be impossible. Not impossible, Marcus corrected, just difficult. He gathered several volumes. We need to look at multiple sources. Employment records from textile mills, since Harrison Aldrich owned several. Church registries, since servants often attended separate services. Police reports, especially... He paused. Especially reports about missing children or suspected abuse cases. Emma glanced at the clock. The reading room closed in 2 hours. How much can we realistically get through today? Marcus was already stacking books. Not enough. He looked at her seriously. Emma, if this photograph documents what I think it does, we're looking at potentially criminal evidence. Once we go public with this, it's going to create waves. The Aldrich name still carries weight in Boston. There are descendants, foundations, endowments. Emma looked at the photograph on her laptop screen, at the boy's desperate eyes, his clenched fist, the tooth hidden in his palm. He waited over 100 years for someone to see, she said quietly. I'm not going to ignore that now. Marcus nodded slowly. Then let's find out who he was, and what Harrison Aldrich and his family were hiding. The next morning, Emma and Marcus drove to Lowell, Massachusetts, where the corporate archives of Aldrich Textiles had been donated to the National Park Service as part of the city's Industrial History Preservation Project. The archive occupied a climate-controlled room in a former mill building, now a museum dedicated to America's Industrial Revolution. An archivist named Patricia greeted them, her skepticism evident. We don't get many requests for personnel records from 1901, she said, leading them through rows of metal shelving. Most researchers are interested in the technology, the machinery, the business operations. The workers themselves, she trailed off meaningfully, were considered expendable, Marcus finished, which is exactly why we need to see those records. Patricia pulled out several large ledgers, their leather covers cracked with age. These are the employment registers from the Aldrich mills in Lawrence and Lowell. They're not complete. Record-keeping for unskilled workers was inconsistent at best. She set them on a reading table. You'll find mostly adults listed. Children were often recorded only by first name, if at all. Emma opened the first ledger carefully. The pages were filled with names written in faded iron gall ink. Mary Sullivan, Agnes O'Brien, Bridget Finnegan. Beside each name were columns noting position, wages, and date of employment. The wages were shockingly low, often just dollars per week for 12 to 14-hour shifts. Marcus worked through a different ledger, this one from 1899 to 1902. His finger stopped on a particular entry. Emma, look at this. The entry read, Thomas, child worker, age approx. 8, employed in picking room, 6 days weekly, wage, board only. Accompanied mother, Margaret, deceased July 1900. Just Thomas, Emma said. No surname. Marcus flipped forward through the pages. The entry for Thomas appeared sporadically, sometimes with notations. Absent, illness, docked wages, insubordination, transferred to Aldrich household, sept 1900. Emma's breath caught. He was transferred to the household? As what? Patricia, who had been reading over their shoulders, spoke quietly. After the mother died, the child would have had nowhere to go. Sometimes mill owners would take children into their homes as servants, officially as charity, but really as unpaid labor. They'd be listed as wards or charitable cases. Marcus was already reaching for another set of records. Do you have household staff registries? Patricia hesitated. We have some personal papers from Harrison Aldrich, correspondence, financial records. She looked between them. But if you're investigating abuse, you should know that powerful families were very good at making problems disappear. Whatever you find in these records will be what they wanted, preserved. Emma thought of the boy's eyes in the photograph, the cold rage, the desperate determination. He knew that, she said. That's why he held on to physical evidence. They spent the next 4 hours combing through Aldrich's personal papers. Most were mundane, business correspondence, invoices for household goods, receipts for clothing and furniture. But buried in a folder marked Household Expenses, 1900-1902, Marcus found something significant. A letter, dated October 1900, from Harrison Aldrich to a Dr. Robert Thorne. The handwriting was educated, controlled. Dr. Thorne, regarding the recent incident with the ward child Thomas, I trust your discretion as always. The boy's injury was accidental and requires no official documentation. Your continued cooperation in such matters is appreciated and will be reflected in our ongoing financial arrangement. Marcus looked up at Emma. This is evidence of a cover-up. Emma photographed the letter with her phone. What injury? And why would Aldrich need to pay a doctor for discretion? Patricia spoke from the doorway, her voice tight. Because whatever happened to that boy, it wasn't accidental. And Dr. Thorne was willing to lie about it for money. Emma returned to the photograph on her laptop, zooming in on the tooth clenched in Thomas's fist. The timeline was coming together. Thomas's mother died in July 1900. He was transferred to the Aldrich household in September. By October, there was an incident requiring medical attention and a paid cover-up. And sometime around 1901, a photograph was taken where Thomas stood in the background, bearing witness with a human tooth hidden in his palm. Whose tooth? Marcus asked the question they were all thinking. Emma stared at the boy's face on her screen. I think, she said slowly, it belonged to whoever hurt him, and I think he took it as proof. Finding information about Dr. Robert Thorne proved easier than expected. Marcus located his name in the 1901 Boston Medical Directory. Thorne, Robert M., physician, private practice, specializing in disorders of the nervous system and injuries of a delicate nature, office, 156 Beacon Street. Injuries of a delicate nature, Emma read aloud. That's Victorian euphemism for something they didn't want to name directly. They were back in Emma's studio, surrounded by printouts of documents, timelines, scrawled on a whiteboard, and the daguerreotype itself, now fully restored and mounted in a new archival case. The boy, Thomas, stared out at them with his unwavering, accusatory gaze. Marcus was searching through digitized newspaper archives on his laptop. Beacon Street address means he served wealthy clients exclusively. That part of Beacon Hill was, still is, where Boston's elite lived. He scrolled through search results. Let me see if Thorne ever appeared in any legal proceedings or medical board reviews. Emma, meanwhile, was examining a different angle. She had contacted the Massachusetts Medical Society's historical archives, requesting any surviving records related to Dr. Thorne. A helpful archivist had sent her a collection of scanned documents, mostly routine correspondence, but one letter stood out. It was dated November 1900, written by a Dr. Samuel Morrison to the Massachusetts Medical Board. Gentlemen, I write to express concern regarding the professional conduct of Dr. Robert Thorne. It has come to my attention through reliable sources that Dr. Thorne may be providing medical services designed to conceal evidence of criminal activity, particularly cases involving injuries to persons in vulnerable circumstances. While I lack concrete proof, I believe this matter warrants investigation. Marcus read over her shoulder. Did they investigate? Emma showed him the response, dated 2 weeks later. Dr. Morrison, the board has reviewed your concerns regarding Dr. Thorne. Without specific evidence or testimony from affected parties, we cannot proceed with an investigation. Dr. Thorne's clients include several prominent families whose reputations are beyond reproach. We suggest you direct your energies toward more productive professional pursuits. The medical board protected him, Marcus said, anger creeping into his voice, because his clients were too important. Emma pulled up another document, a society page from the Boston Herald, dated December 1900. It showed a photograph from a charity gala, wealthy men in evening wear, including Harrison Aldrich and Dr. Robert Thorne, standing together, champagne glasses raised. The caption read, "Prominent citizens gather to support the Boston Children's Aid Society." The irony is nauseating, Emma said. They posed as benefactors of children while covering up abuse. Marcus leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. We have circumstantial evidence of a cover-up, but we still don't know exactly what happened to Thomas. The tooth is evidence of violence, but whose tooth? How did Thomas get it? And he paused. Most importantly, what happened to him after this photograph was taken? Emma had been dreading that question. Child workers in 1901 had virtually no protections. If Thomas tried to speak out, if he threatened to expose what he knew, she didn't finish the sentence. Marcus opened a new search window. Let me look for death records. If Thomas died in Boston between 1901 and, say, 1905, there should be some documentation. While he searched, Emma returned to the photograph itself, examining it under magnification once more. She had been so focused on Thomas that she hadn't paid adequate attention to the Aldrich family in the foreground. Now she studied them systematically. Harrison Aldrich stood with confident posture, his hand on that ornate walking stick. But looking closer, Emma noticed something she had missed before. The handle of the walking stick was unusual, made from what appeared to be silver shaped into an elaborate knob. And there, barely visible on the man's right hand, she could see scrapes and bruising across his knuckles. "Recent injuries," she said aloud. "Marcus, look at this." He came over and Emma pointed out the details on the enhanced image. Harrison Aldrich's hand. Those are defensive wounds, or injuries from hitting something, or someone. Marcus's face went pale. The timeline fits. The photograph was taken in 1901, probably spring or summer based on the foliage. The letter about Thomas's accidental injury was October 1900. These injuries on Aldrich's hand are from around the same time, Emma finished. She zoomed in further on Thomas's face, on the fresh bruise on his cheek, and I think I know whose tooth Thomas was holding. They both stared at the photograph in silence, the implications settling over them like a suffocating weight. Marcus spoke first, his voice quiet and hard. Thomas fought back. Marcus found the death record 2 hours later. His face had gone white as he turned his laptop toward Emma. The document was a scanned image from the city of Boston's vital records. Death certificate. Thomas, surname unknown. Male child, age approximately 9 years. Date of death, March 17th, 1901. Cause of death, accidental drowning. Location, Charles River. Reported by Harrison P. Aldrich. Emma felt cold spreading through her chest. Reported by Aldrich himself. Marcus pulled up a companion document, a brief police report from the same date. Child ward of the Aldrich household discovered in Charles River near Dartmouth Street. Mr. Aldrich reports the boy wandered from the residence during the night. No signs of foul play. Body released to Aldrich for private burial. No investigation, Emma said, her voice tight with anger. A 9-year-old child dies suspiciously and they just accept Aldrich's word. Marcus was already searching for more. Look at this. He showed her a newspaper article from March 18th, 1901. A tiny notice buried on page 7 of the Boston Globe. Child drowns in river. Police report the accidental death of a child worker employed by the Aldrich household. The family asks for privacy during this difficult time. A child worker, Emma repeated. Not even his name. He's reduced to his labor status, even in death. She stood abruptly, pacing the studio. The photograph was taken before March 1901. We can date it more precisely by the foliage and the children's clothing. Probably spring 1901, maybe late winter. So Thomas was still alive, still in that household, still holding on to that tooth like evidence. She turned back to Marcus. He knew they were going to kill him. We can't prove that, Marcus said, though his tone suggested he believed it. Can't we? Emma gestured at her monitor where the enhanced photograph filled the screen. Look at his eyes, Marcus. That's not the face of a child who thinks he's safe. That's the face of someone who knows he's in danger and is trying to leave proof behind. Marcus closed his laptop slowly. If we go public with this theory, that Harrison Aldrich murdered a child and the Boston police helped cover it up, we need to be absolutely certain. The Aldrich name still has power. There's an Aldrich wing at Mass General, an Aldrich scholarship fund at Harvard, descendants who will have resources to fight back. Emma sat down, forcing herself to think clearly. What would make this irrefutable? What do we need? Proof that the tooth Thomas was holding came from Harrison Aldrich himself, Marcus said. Proof of a pattern of violence. Testimony or records from other servants who witnessed abuse, and he paused. We need to find where Thomas was buried. The death certificate didn't list a burial location, Emma noted, because there probably wasn't one, Marcus said quietly. Or if there was, it would be unmarked. Children like Thomas were buried in paupers' sections of cemeteries. If they were buried at all, sometimes bodies were simply disposed of. Emma looked at the photograph again, at Thomas's clenched fist. He couldn't write down what happened to him. He couldn't testify. But he could hold on to evidence. Physical, undeniable evidence. She leaned closer to the screen. What if the tooth is still with him? Marcus frowned. You mean in his grave? If he was buried? Even in an unmarked location? And if by some chance that tooth was with him? Emma was thinking aloud now. Modern forensic techniques could extract DNA from a tooth that old. We could prove it was Aldrich's. That's assuming the body was buried, Marcus said. Assuming we could find the burial location. Assuming the tooth was placed with him and not destroyed. Those are a lot of assumptions, Emma. She knew he was right, but the possibility wouldn't let her go. Marcus, this boy held onto that tooth through everything. Through beatings, through fear, through knowing he was going to die. He kept it because it was proof. Would he have let it go? Marcus considered this. If the photograph was taken shortly before his death, and if he knew he was in danger, he might have kept it on his person. Hidden in his clothing, maybe. Emma pulled up the death report again. His body was recovered from the river. If the tooth was hidden well enough, if it stayed with him when he was buried, we have to find the burial site, Marcus said. He was already opening new search windows. Cemetery records from 1901, paupers' burials, unclaimed bodies. He looked up at Emma. This is going to take time. Thomas waited 123 years, Emma said. We can give him a few more days. The search for Thomas's burial location took 3 weeks. Marcus worked through cemetery records across Boston while Emma pursued a parallel investigation, tracking down any living descendants of people who had worked in the Aldrich household in 1901. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Marcus discovered a ledger from the South End Burying Ground, one of Boston's older cemeteries, which included a section for charitable burials funded by wealthy families. In March 1901, Harrison Aldrich had paid for a plot in this section, officially described as Christian Charity for a Departed Ward. The plot number was listed, Section D, Row 12, Plot 47. But when Marcus visited the cemetery, he found the location overgrown and unmarked, indistinguishable from the dozens of other forgotten graves in that neglected corner. Meanwhile, Emma had found something equally significant. Catherine Murphy, age 93, living in a nursing facility in Quincy. Catherine's grandmother had worked as a housemaid in the Aldrich household from 1899 to 1902. Emma visited on a gray November afternoon. Catherine sat in a wheelchair near a window overlooking a small garden, her hands folded in her lap, her mind remarkably sharp despite her age. My grandmother never spoke about that house, Catherine said after Emma explained her research. Not until the very end, when she was dying. She was scared, you understand? Scared even 50 years later. What did she tell you? Emma asked gently. Catherine's eyes grew distant. There was a boy. Thomas. Just a little thing. Maybe 8 or 9. His mother had worked in one of Aldrich's mills until she died of consumption. The boy came to the house as a servant, officially a ward, but really just unpaid labor. She paused. My grandmother said Mr. Aldrich had a temper, especially when he drank, and he drank often. Emma showed Catherine the restored daguerreotype on her tablet. Catherine stared at it for a long moment, her finger trembling as she pointed to Thomas in the background. That's him, she whispered. Look at his eyes. My grandmother said he had eyes that knew too much. She said he'd seen things no child should see. Do you know what happened to him? Catherine nodded slowly. My grandmother was there the night Thomas died. She said there was a terrible fight. She heard shouting, things breaking, a child screaming. Mr. Aldrich came out of his study with blood on his knuckles and his collar torn. She touched her own mouth. One of his teeth was gone. Just knocked clean out. Emma felt her heart pounding. And Thomas? Was found in the river the next morning, Catherine said. But my grandmother didn't believe he drowned accidentally. She said... The old woman's voice broke. She said she saw Thomas that night, after the fight, saw him slip out the back door with something clutched in his hand. He looked back at her once, and she knew he wasn't running away. He was going to the river himself, because he knew they would kill him if he stayed, Emma said quietly. Catherine nodded. He chose his own death over what they would do to him. My grandmother carried that guilt her whole life, that she didn't stop him, didn't help him, but she was terrified. Aldrich had already made one child disappear. If she spoke up, she'd be next. Emma showed Catherine the enhanced image of Thomas's clenched fist. Before he died, he held on to something. Evidence. Do you know what it was? Catherine stared at the image, then looked up at Emma with tears in her eyes. The tooth, she whispered. My grandmother said he'd knocked out Aldrich's tooth during the fight. Said Thomas grabbed it off the floor like it was a treasure. She wiped her eyes. He kept it, even at the end. My grandmother always believed that's why he held on, so someday someone would know what really happened. Emma felt something break open in her chest. Grief and rage and determination all at once. We found his grave, she said. Would you give permission for us to exhume him? To see if the tooth is still there? Catherine looked back at the photograph, at Thomas's cold, desperate eyes. You bring that boy justice, she said firmly. You make sure the world knows his name and what they did to him. She gripped Emma's hand with surprising strength. My grandmother waited her whole life for someone to believe her. Don't let Thomas wait any longer. The exhumation took place on a cold morning in December, exactly 123 years after Thomas had been buried. Emma and Marcus stood at the edge of Section D, Row 12, Plot 47, watching as forensic archaeologists carefully excavated the site under proper legal authorization and the supervision of the Massachusetts State Police. The case had gained official attention after Emma presented her evidence to the district attorney's office. While Harrison Aldrich was long dead, the case represented a potential historical injustice that warranted investigation. The DA had authorized the exhumation, and local media had begun covering